All right, welcome back to Adobe Photoshop. And today we're going to run through this cool little tutorial that I just ran through with one of my college classes. And it is very similar to HDR. So if you know what HDR is, it's basically extending the tonal range. Look, a camera can only capture so much in one frame. So in HDR, we can take a bracketed series of images where there's an image that's underexposed, overexposed, and normally exposed. And we combine those two to extend that tonal range. Now, that works great for a moment in time. What happens if you want to do it over a period of time, from like sun setting to when it's completely dark outside? And this process can work for a whole myriad of different applications. So if you're doing interior architecture, if you want to do landscape, anything where you're trying to combine different color balances and exposures over a period of time. So think of this. If have a picture of a house, all right, and the sun is setting on the house and it looks beautiful, we take that picture, but the lights really aren't going to be on in that house at that point, and if they are, the sun's going to kind of overpower them. So we can wait a period of time and take a second picture, and the great thing about that is we can color correct just for those specific lights, and then we can use blending modes in Photoshop to combine those two images. Essentially, that's what we're going to do today, but we're going to do it with more frames than just two. I'm going to walk you through basically how HDR works and why we don't use it for that. And then I'm going to run you through this process. Look, this process is essentially photo oriented. You have to photograph it correctly for it to work. We use Photoshop as the tool, but it's really easy to do. I might run through some terminology that you've never heard of, but believe me, the blending of these images is super simple, so you'll easily be able to follow along. So we're going to slide on over to Photoshop and take a look at how the process is done. All right, we are inside Photoshop, and here are a series of some of the images that we're going to use. So this is the city of Harrisburg in Pennsylvania. And look, it's not the most dynamic photo, but it has elements in there that I wanted to use for this tutorial. And look, I was letting my students have better angles and locations when we did this. So this image right here, this image here, and this image here are a series of bracketed images. And essentially I took these all at the same time. All right, so we'll say this is the normal exposure. This is a little bit dark. This is a little bit bright. And look, we can combine these images, and I'm just going to do this in Adobe Camera Raw, but you could do it in Photoshop, you could do it in Lightroom. So I'm just going to go ahead and select all three of those images. That launches this into Adobe Photoshop. I'm going to select all of these images by holding Shift, and now all of those are selected. Next up, we're going to come up here. You see those three little dots? We're going to click those three little dots, and we're going to slide down here to where it says Merge to HDR. And it's going to launch this little window, and this little window is saying, do you want to auto align the images? Now, even though I used a tripod, they might have moved a little bit, so I definitely want to do that. Apply auto settings. I don't want to apply auto settings to it. All right. And we're going to go ahead and merge. And essentially, it's going to combine all of these three images into one image. We're going to go ahead and say that's okay. And there it goes. Okay, so you can see it's created this new DNG of these three combined images here. Now, it hasn't done anything to these images, but if we look at this, which is essentially our first image, and then we come down here to our last image, what have we done? Well, we are going to be able to get better detail in the highlights with the darker image, and the brighter image is going to give us more information so we can open up the shadows in those images. Now, look, this image was shot well, and you really have a lot of detail throughout it, but essentially that's what it's doing. All right. And now if we come over here, you'll notice we can slide this, but if you notice right here, we now have 10 stops of adjustment. Go back to this initial image and we'll slide this over, and notice we only have 5 stops of adjustment. So when you're in HDR, by combining all three of these images, we're getting more information, and that more information is allowing us to adjust this much further than we could before. Essentially, we now have 10 stops of adjustment by combining these three images to get more dynamically out of this image. We're going to go ahead and hit because we're not going to use that. But what happens in a situation like this? We have this image here. Now I could use a sunset image here. So if I wanted to use this image, I could definitely use this image, or I could go here where it's cooled down and we've lost that. Now, if we look at this image, there's nothing wrong with it, but the lights aren't on here. The lights aren't on here. We can't really see the lights here, and the lights aren't on in the buildings. And what if we want to combine all those? Well, we have to wait for those different lights to come on. And all those different lights are different color temperatures and different exposures. So what I've done is taking a series of images, and I'll explain to you what I'm looking at when I'm doing this. So this is just a normal exposure. And then I took it a little bit later, all right? So we get a different color sky. I could start with this, I could start with this, or I could combine this. It really depends on what I want. But you could see in this, now this is brighter and the lights are starting to come on here where we can't really see it here. We can start to see it here. And then as things start to get darker, I'm exposing for different lights, all right? When I combine this image, the dark areas are not gonna be blended into it. It's just for the light areas. I changed basically this is the same image, but I had a little bit longer exposure, so the lights are a little bit brighter. But also notice I could make these lights neutral, so I can color correct just for these lights because that's all I'm gonna be blending. And I've taken a series of images and basically I'm just looking at different aspects. So now we're getting even more glow in the city lights. So if I want more glow in my initial image, we can use that. Now it's getting much darker. You can see in this one, I might have used it before and color corrected a little bit because the lights are a little bit more neutral than they are here. I've also got a longer exposure, so they're more iridescent, all right, glowing more in this image than in this image. We're also starting to pick up some of the purple under the bridge. Here, you're really starting to see the purple, and we're starting to see this subtle blue color that starts to appear here. A little bit later at time, we're getting more of that color and a little bit longer exposure in this image. And so in this image, these lights are coming out better, but these are way overexposed. And this is kind of like in between. So what we're going to do is use each of these individual images bind together to make one image and extend that tonal range. This is not something you could do in HDR because the process is involved over time. So let's do this. We're going to go in here. All right, so we're going to go back here to the beginning. And just so I can show everybody how this stuff works, we're going to go ahead and grab this image here. We'll grab this image. We'll grab this image, this image, this image, one, and this one. Okay, we're going to grab all those images. We might not use them all, but we're going to grab them all. So I'm going to hit Command D. That's going to throw this into Adobe Camera Raw. Okay. And at this point, we're going to toggle through these images individually, and we're going to color correct, and we're going to change any basic overall exposures that we want. So in this image, I think I'm just going to darken it down a little bit. That looks good. We're going to come to this image. Now look, this image has cooled off. I want a image overall for this image. I could leave this. I can also come in here and warm this image up a little bit. If I want it to be warmer, I could make it really warm. All right. It's really just dependent on what you want. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave that there. I'm also going to darken this a little bit. So we're going to just darken that a teeny tiny bit. I'm going to come up to this next image. And once again, I'm going to go back into the color. I'm going to warm this image up just a little bit. See what happens about magenta. Yeah, that looks good. Now, when we start getting into these images, I am worried less about this ambient exposure as I am the lights on the building. So I'm going to actually cool these down a little bit so they're a little more neutral. We're going to add a little green. Looks pretty good. In this image, we're going to go ahead and cool that down a little bit. We're going to make it a little more magenta. I'm also going to do the color mixer just so you can see what's happening. We're going to go into the yellow color. And basically, I can kind of shift that yellow color around. And we're going to desaturate it so we get rid of a lot of that yellow. All right. That looks pretty good. We're going to come here. We're going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to get rid of some of that yellow. And we're going to go back up here and we're going to color correct that out, right? You look, you can do whatever you want in these images. If you look at these images, it's a little bit greenish. So let's go ahead and you can see we're going to come up here and add some magenta. Looks pretty good. And we've got this image. It's overexposed. So I'm going to first come in here and knock down the highlights a little bit. And my exposure a little bit. Pretty good. And in this image, I'm essentially after this purple and these blues. So I don't really care much about what this looks like because I don't think I'm going to be using it. And I think that looks pretty good. Look, this is something that we can all go back into and adjust further once we get into Photoshop. So I'm going to hit Command A and open all these images into Adobe Photoshop. All right, let's close that. So you can see we've got all these different windows up here. Now, the issue is, yeah, these are all open in different tabs. That's not what we want. We want these in one file. So we're going to use a cool little trick. We're going to come up here to File, and we're going to go down to Scripts and load files into a stack. This little window comes up. We're going to hit Add Open Files. We're going to put to automatically align source images. This is just for any camera movement that I might have gotten when I took these images, even though I did use the tripod. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. And you can see it's basically selecting all those files and they're going to load them into one giant. All right, so you can see right here, now all those files are stacked right on top of each other. Looks like we did have a little movement. You can see the translucency down there. So we can come in here and just get rid of all these other files just so it's not complicated with people. All right, so we are back here. I'm gonna hit Command 0 to make that as big as possible. And essentially our top image is the only one that's showing, even though these are all open. Okay, so I'm gonna drag this down to the very bottom. And we're gonna actually turn these. Okay, so we have this image here. And let's say I want to blend it with this image here. I can turn this image on. You can see we're starting to get some lights. Maybe there's not enough there. Let's take a look at this one. And let's take a look at this one. That looks a little bit better. So let's go ahead and select this image. So we have nice lighting here, but in the original image, yeah, we don't have any lights. So what happens if we want to turn on the lights? Well, we use what we call blending modes. So come up here to where it says normal, click on this, and we're going to drop down to lighten. And you can see by changing this to lighten, now it doesn't look super realistic in this image. Well, why? Because it's at sunset, but it is blending the lighter areas. So what happens with the blending mode is this. We're just using the lighten and screen. What happens in the blending mode is this is what we call the base image. Okay. Remember this when I go over it. And this is the blend image, okay? So when we do this and we go to lighten, it's saying if an area in the blend image, which is the top image with the lights here, if those areas are brighter, use those pixels. Screen does it similarly, but differently. It says that if any areas in the blend image are brighter than the base image, it brightens the base image dependent on the brightness of the other image. So if I come down here and I go from lighten to screen, you're seeing a difference. Look, this can be personal preference. There's no way, but lighten is replacing the blend pixel with the base pixel, and screen is brightening the base pixel dependent on how much brighter the blend pixel is. I know that's difficult to conceptualize, but essentially that's what it's doing. So basically, if we want to turn on the lights, we just go to lighten and boom, the lights are on. I can come here, turn this on and off, and we're doing that. So remember when I said we're blending images for a period of time? That's essentially what we're looking at doing here. Now, in this case, I don't want this image, so we're going to delete it. And I pretty much want most of these images in the opposite order, which kind of sucks. So we'll just kind of move these around. All right, and we're going to turn off everything except for the bottom image. So we have, this is our bottom image, all right? And if we turn on that top image, we can see it's a little bit darker and it looks a little bit better. So I can turn this image on and I can come here and I can say, hey, blend this with the image below by looking at the pixel variance. We can either use screen or lighten. Any area in the top image that's brighter, placing it. Areas that's darker, it's not replacing it. So we're picking up a little bit of stuff there, but essentially it's not really doing a lot to that image. In that case, we use the lighten blending mode. But what happens if I want to use the darken? We can come up here to, and we've got essentially darken, multiply, all right? So darken is doing the opposite of what lighten did. So if the pixel in the blend is darker, it's going to replace it. If it's not, it's going to leave it alone. Multiply is going to darken the pixel below. So it's making it way too dark. That's not going to work. So I could essentially do a darken blend mode and then turn these on and off. And you can see it's darkening those areas. Now, it might make it too dark. So what I then do is take this layer here, which is the blend layer, and I can lower that opacity. So we're not getting so much of that effect. So in essence, we're darkening some areas of this image. All right, let's say that looks good. Next thing we can do is turn on the next layer here, and that looks good. And we can go up one. This looks better. Let's go ahead and turn this layer on. I don't know if I like that one. Then we've got a lot of stuff going on here. So I think we're going to go ahead with this image. We're going to come up here. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to go up to the lighten blending mode, and we're lighten blending mode that image in. So all essentially we're doing is adding the luminance of the buildings into this image, right? So now it looks like some of those lights are on, but it's still sort of at sunset. And remember, this whole process is non-destructive. So if you remember where I darken this, if I want to adjust this a little bit more, I can just go back in there and slide that number. And then we've got this image here, which is probably a better overall exposure. So I could come here and select this, and I could do the same thing. We can just say lighten blending mode. So when I turn this on and off, it's just replacing any pixel that's brighter than what we see below the image. So if I want this image to be a little bit darker, I can start with this image or this image. So I think I'm going to start with this image, but what I'm going to do with this image selected, I'm going to go ahead and click on my curves, and I'm essentially going to come in here and just adjust this a little teeny bit. Looks pretty good. Now, because this image is only on top of this image, this adjustment is only applying here. It's not applying up here. So what I'm going to do next is come up here. I'm going to turn this layer on. You can see, remember, this is overriding everything below it. So we're going to click on this, and we're going to change this to a lighten blending mode. And that looks pretty good, right? So now we're starting to get some illumination, but we've got some darker values there. That's good. Then we're going to come up here, and we're going to turn this one on. And the lighten blending mode is already on. So we're going to turn that off and on and on. And in this case, I kind of like what it did in certain areas, but don't like what it did in others. So we're going to come up here. We're going to go ahead and hold that Option or Alt key. We're going to click the mask to make a black mask. And then we're going to take the color white, because white in a mask is making something apply or us be able to see it. Come in here and apply those different areas. And look, you could do that anywhere. So if I wanted to brighten some areas over here or maybe in here, we could easily blend those into it. And so now we're getting a more dynamic image. So I'm going to come in here with my crop tool. We're going to change this. We're going to level out that horizon. We're going to come in and crop those bits off that we didn't like. Go ahead and hit return. And you can see in this final image, unlike HDR, we've taken single exposures, but we've done them over time, and we've used blending modes, color correction, and luminance values to blend them all together to once again give us an extended dynamic range and achieve an image that we could never get in one exposure. Well, if you found this video helpful, and give us a thumbs up, that would be great. Any comments or questions, you can leave those down below. Don't forget to subscribe. An absolutely wonderful day.